So hi, everybody. It's getting late in the day, and we're running behind. I'm going to try to be relatively brief in the interest of getting to maybe some discussion if there's still time left after the next few speakers. And I'm very pleased and aided in my brevity to follow Tom McGarrity and Damon earlier, as well as Lori, of course, because, well, you'll see why. I first met Ralph, I think, in the early 90s. Clinton was already in. NAFTA was on the way to getting signed. And it was Ralph who first told me, he pressed it into my hands. I remember, John, you were there too, the Powell Memorandum, which I, much to my shame, had never read before. The Powell Memorandum being the famous memo from Lewis Powell to his good buddy Gene Sidnor at the Chamber of Commerce Education Committee. Powell, of course, was running the Virginia Chamber at that point, a prominent corporate lawyer in Virginia. This is well before he went on the court under Richard Nixon. And Powell called for a full-spirited, full-throated, very disciplined, almost with military dedication, real civic grit from the elites. Full-scale attack on the offered in defense of the sanctity of the free market system, free market capitalism. And that was what, 1969, I guess, and that was when I was entering school. And basically, I think of most of my adult period as marking the period of long-term decline of American democracy. So when I reached maturity was I guess 1973. I was born in 72, so I was 21 in 73, and by that, it's been more or less downhill ever since. So you can blame me, or you can blame the success of business mobilization. Anyway, I think the success of Powell, I don't want to overstate Powell's influence or the influence of the Powell Memorandum, but what it does very clearly lay out are the elements needed in any functioning progressive or reactionary movement, any social movement that actually wants to govern and do so with sizable majorities for some period of time. And it's worth recalling what the elements in that are that are laid out pretty clearly in Powell. One is you need very clear channels of communication of whatever it is that you're putting out there. These need to be open they need to be to the mass public, of course, but primarily and first to your own base, and then the leadership of your own secondary leadership. You need to make, secondly, extremely vigorous, sustained efforts to recruit, train, mentor, place, reward, encourage, discipline, blah, 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 the young, because any social movement, if it's going to have any lifetime, has to begin to replace itself more or less from the beginning, and the young people have to be brought in. And then, of course, you need the 4 R's. You need a message, a relatively straightforward message that can be understood with an accompanying program. The steps in the program need to be within reach, but also cumulatively getting you some sort of momentum over time, so that each further step becomes a little bit easier to take because you've got the progress of the first step taken. So a message, and you need a lot of messengers. You need a ton of people in the base that you eventually want to get to, in our case, the American public, and eventually, of course, the world public. And these messengers have to look like and talk like and be immediately recognizable by other people. They have to be as diverse, probably, as the population that you want to reach. Why? Because we're still, we're very slow, very early still in our evolutionary advance as animals. We still have the 4 Fs, This is what I learned in high school, the 4 F's of, fight or flight, food, and the sex. You can understand what the F was we used in high school. And those are very, very basic, built into our animal creatures. We still have this big reptile brain, the amygdala, and the whole limbic system, which is still governing a lot of our conscious behavior. We do have this frontal cortex, and we made tremendous advance over the last 200,000 years or so that Homo sapiens has dominated, and that's good. But we are still fairly primitive creatures. Anyway, we digress. And we respond to any phenotype that doesn't look identical to our own with some curiosity, maybe, but mostly fear and distance and so on. The bottom line of which is people like themselves first. They can be trained a little bit, and they can over time through discovery come to appreciate others and even love others, etc. But in general, your messengers you want to look like and feel like and smell like most of the population you want to get to. Messengers. And then you need some models. You need examples of stuff that you've done, maybe not quite at the program scale that you want to get to nationally, but that's been done and that can be replicated elsewhere. For the right, well, I'll go through what the right, how the right filled in all these things, but that's also something I think any progressive movement would need as well. And then you need some money. You don't need a huge amount of money because you're advantaged by the fact, or we're advantaged by the fact, as Rob was pointing out, that the public is basically on our side. It's just the public is not in any way organized or certainly in control of our government. But we do not have a lot of work to do to persuade people that it would be a good thing to take the income cap over off of Social Security, or enable Medicare to use its buying power to bargain prices down. It doesn't take a lot of energy on our part to persuade people. It'd be nice to pay people something closer to a living real wage or an entry-level wage. Doesn't take a lot of time to persuade people. It'd be good to have a super abundant supply of quality public goods in America, including higher education and public parks and areas of public recreation and decent, clean drinking water and clean air and a variety of other things that Ralph and many of the people in this room have devoted their lives to struggling for in one way or another. The public would like to have high quality public good and transit and a variety of other things. I don't think the public is really our problem. The real problem is with a variety of elites who bought into either been bought off, bribery, or bought into in ideology, this market fundamentalism and a variety of other ideas. Let me just speak to the market fundamentalism thing, if I could, for a second, and then talk about what I think it would mean to actually fight against it in a serious way. The reason why I wanted to give a shout out to Tom and Damon at the outset is that I think he's leaving already, just before I praised you. Okay, well, run away, all right. What? All right, well, let's do you first. In terms of the politics, I think Damon has it exactly right. We'll get to the theory here in a second. But at the level of political argument, the idea that, well, should we give it to the market? Should we give it to the government? How much government intervention or regulation of the market do you need? Is, I think, very exactly as Damon said, the absolutely wrong discussion to be having. And that is a discussion that has completely preoccupied still our politics. So getting to our positive program, one thing that we should do is just massive education in the elements of what the legal realists and everyone since have given us in terms of understanding the dependence of markets, the constitution of markets by public authority. every politician should be able to redo Bob Reich's routine on, markets are just bundles of rules, and they cannot make those rules themselves. So the question is, I think Damon posed it absolutely correctly, question for public policy is what sorts of markets, to what end do we want to devise? What are the rules that we want to get? But we should really defeat the idea of markets as these initially the subjects of immaculate conception or something. All right, that's the thing. You can go now, it's okay. All right, and to Tom, the shout out is the remark about endogenous preferences. In the back and forth between, I don't know, let's start with Adam Smith, between the idea that these self-regulating markets could actually deliver the wealth of nations, could actually get you a social optimum, in which no one could be made better off from the standpoint of efficiency, not equity, not religion, not morality, anything, but just economic efficiency. No one could be made better off without someone being made worse off. That's been the back and forth. And that's going on for, well, at least 250 years now. It seemed that Smith and the classical liberals had sort of won. Smith, of course, was a much deeper thinker than the people from, I don't know, Milton Friedman and others, carrying around little pictures of Adam Smith on their ties that exploited his work. Smith had a much deeper view of human nature than suggested by many of his alleged acolytes, and he understood the great limits on markets. But let's leave that aside too. And just the Smithian argument has been refined over the years through neoclassical economics, the successive revolutions in economics, et cetera. And we do know that markets can produce that sort of efficient equilibrium outcome under very stringent conditions, though. First of all, you have to have markets in everything. Markets need to be complete. Second, markets have to have complete information. Everyone needs to know everything about everyone else and everything that is to be known at that point in time. And third, markets need to be independent. There can be no public goods, no externalities, no increasing returns anywhere, because the whole point of the appeal of markets was that no one is able to impose any costs on anybody else. And all those things interfere with that, either directly or through the tax or other provisions needed for those public goods. And that was an extremely appealing ideal, and I think very, very important in the development of political thought, particularly in the West, but then it spread, all over the world, because it enabled you to think at least about the tasks of government as not dealing with the substance of actually running the economy. You could leave that increasingly to the market. And out of that came the classical liberal view of, well, a natural right to private property and its accumulation, of course, self-regulating markets as to take care of the economy once you respected that natural right, and then a commitment to very limited government because you did not need much work in government, and then also the freedom stuff, the civil rights and civil liberties universally supplied. And that was an extremely attractive idea, and it was importantly liberating, certainly from the previous constraints of different sorts of feudalisms. But over time, people understood that that perfectly functioning market was not, in fact, anything more than an ideal, and then that led to various, let the market do its work, and we're going to clean up afterwards, let's make some rules, let's do some regulation, let's, in the cases of increasing returns, natural monopolies, et cetera, let's do a little bit of regulation, yada, yada, yada. Let's call that the sort of broadly social democratic accommodation to market capitalism. The Bad-Godesberg program, the famous Bad-Godesberg program, the German Social Democratic Party renouncing aspirations to actual socialism, they said, okay, well, we are a pro-capitalist, but a social capitalist or, more benign capitalist party. Markets were never possible, state action where necessary. That was sort of the boundary for much of the New Deal and that period. And then there was a counterattack attack made on all this. And here is where Buchanan and the whole public choice movement, I think, has really, struck something of a heart into liberal conscience and confidence in taking action regulating markets. And the essential point of public choice, of course, it's a complicated view, but the essential point is very simple to understand, that there's no particular reason to believe that the people operating the government are going to have anything better, any better motivations or better capacities than the people higgling and piggling around these markets that their regulation tries to constrain. And, or as Richard Posner, the famous judge, now retired and defending poor people, observed, we understand that the government can do things much better than markets, but we have no reason of any confidence you'll stop just there. And you can overreach in different ways. And I think in the same way that liberals or progressives or whatever we call ourselves should recognize that markets do have that innate, bloodletting commercial drive, which is, of course, a large part of their dynamism, but that is insatiable and will not respect any boundaries unless it is really contained. Similarly, we have to respect the fact the state per se is not going to respect any boundaries unless it's constrained. I'm going here to some sort of way to persuade a bunch of people. Anyway, so in the back and forth, so round one, Adam Smith, classical liberalism wins, discovery of market imperfections, monopolies, and a variety of abuse and externalities above all. Then social democracy wins, public choice comes in, next round of public choice. But the fourth round, which I don't think most journalists who are not here, or college professors, unfortunately, or certainly college students, or certainly our political leaders quite understand, is the strength of what Tom Garrity was pointing to. In the last 30 or 40 years, we've recognized that it's not just that markets have these imperfections which are subject to some correction, but pervasive failures. And there's absolutely no reason to believe that an actually functioning market, even under relatively ideal competitive conditions, is going to give you anything more in terms of an efficient outcome than some other set of institutions will. The reason is that part of it is the thing that Tom noted, that all preferences are endogenous. Markets rely on exogenous preferences for the market magic to work. Preferences all have to be exogenous. But virtually all preferences are endogenous. And the reason why that's intrinsic to any market is that active people in the market are looking around. And of course, their view is shaped in different ways, in the ways that Tom inventoried, not just by advertising, but by the behavior of other people. But the other thing is that all markets are incomplete. They're incomplete because we know now about transactions we want to do in the future, but that we cannot make or secure right now. And so there's a built-in incompleteness in any market as well. And then markets, of course, suffer from more familiar failures and asymmetries in information available to different people, et cetera. And the combination of endogenous preferences, widespread asymmetries in information, the fact that externalities, positive or negative, inhabit virtually all of our economic action, all leads to a point which is very different than the old social democratic view of markets as, being this ideal, but running off the rails occasionally, but subject to correction. It's a world which is so far from what his epigones imagine that it sort of defeats the initial claim about market efficiency. It's a world in which once you take those things into account, and this is why Stiglitz and Akerlof and Spence and a variety of other people have got Nobel Prizes in the last 30 years for pointing this out. It's a world in which supply and demand may not meet at all, even at equilibrium, in which prices may not really reflect opportunity costs at all, in which inequalities in bargaining power are literally pervasive, and power is pervasive, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I don't think that's widely recognized by our politicians either. All we have to do as humans, as these very imperfect sapiens, with our limbic system and our reptile brains and our big frontal cortex, is to have deliberation among ourselves about the question that Damon was talking about. Given what do we want to do? Well, if we're like our ancestors, there's only really one question. How do we build a society fit to live in? That's the question. Call that the question of justice, if you will. And then to what degree do we want to have markets as part of that, or other sorts of institutions for producing and exchanging value? That's the basic question. But Smith and market fundamentalism is a fantastic distraction. Or I don't want to blame Smith anymore. Market fundamentalism is a complete distraction from that, because it has no foundations. It's intellectually incoherent. It's been debunked with great authority, and we shouldn't worry about it. But we should worry about ourselves, because we are, even as we have most of the public agreeing with us on an awful lot of what we all hold dear, and even if we have the intellectual arguments on our side, as just briefly reviewed for you, we are ourselves incredibly disorganized. So I would suggest that we go back to something of what the Powell Memorandum was talking about and update it and think about what are the communication channels we need, what are the mechanisms of recruiting, training, et cetera, which targeted people we need to do, and how can we recruit and train a ton of messengers? They're coming over the transom right now, so I don't know how much we need to worry about their recruitment, but we certainly need to know something about their training. And then where on earth are we going to find the money? I don't think it's a lot of money, but it's certainly more than, and it's certainly probably less than the collective budgets of all the people in this room, but still a certain pot of money, which would be embarking upon our equivalent of the Mo Pellerin sort of project. If we're going to really get this country making intelligent decisions about itself as a democracy, or would-be democracy, whatever, this is a long-term play, I think. Most of the people are on our side, but the institutions are certainly not there. We should be lifting up those models. We should be training those kids. We should be doing all sorts of lectures, I hope more well-attended than this one, seminars, whatever, in terms of popular education. And then we should try to eventually get that to the point that we can be having these discussions with elected officials. It might actually start with some of them right now, because they assert, at least, that they're on our side. What is our basic message? I think in terms of program, Rob gave an initial inventory for it. I would have put a little bit more emphasis on the global warming thing, but we can work out what the demands are. But it essentially boils down to a ton of high-quality public goods, and here, Tom, I hope not offending folks at CPR, I'm including regulation and law among those essential public goods, not just the substantive public goods of education and clean air, et cetera. A bunch of quality public goods, reasonably paid for, and with the general end of encouraging and enlivening and rejuvenating, et cetera, the conditions of human flourishing. On the ideological and the ideologie straight, on the stuff that Ralph asked us all to think about a little bit, and we haven't talked much here really about fighting back. We've inventoried all the failures, but I'm talking about the fighting back stuff. On the fighting back, on the ideology, I would think that two basic points ought to be hammered home again and again and again. And I don't know how to get this organized, but I would suggest we all try to show a little collective wisdom in at least making these points, which I think all of you would agree with. One is, there's no reason to believe that markets are, in fact, efficient. The story I just went through. And second, markets do not exist independent of the state, and they all depend on state power. And what we want from state power is a ton of public goods, partially, but certainly not exclusively, anywhere near exclusively, securing the conditions of the market operation themselves. So in terms of pushing back on politicians, I would say markets are inefficient. The idea of separating markets from, keep it simpler still, markets cannot be separated from state power, boom. And then we need a ton of public goods. And public goods are good, not just for equity reasons, but for improving the productivity of the overall society. Those are my 2 cents.